Hey guys, it's Will. It's Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, thank you for finding me. If you feel like subscribing, that'd be great. Thank you so much. Give us a comment, give us a thumbs up. I am in the hot box. It is hot as heck right now. I'm really sweating. I don't know if you can tell, but I really wanted to get this video shot. And so, I'm going to try to power through it. It's a Blu-ray review. It's not a Hong Kong movie. I know. It's a Hong Kong Cinema channel. It's a South Korean film. I've never talked about Korean movies on this channel before, other than when someone sent me this in the mail and I unboxed it because there were some Hong Kong films in the same package. Joint Security Area. This was released in 2000. It was directed by Chan-wook, and it stars, and I wrote the names down here because I did not want to get anything wrong, Lee Young-ae, Lee Byun-hong, and Kang Ho-song. So I'm probably mispronouncing those. Obviously, I don't speak any Korean, but those are the actors here are featured on the cover. This is the Arrow release, and this is an incredible Blu-ray release. And so there are three reasons I'm talking about this, even though it's not a Hong Kong film. The first reason is I recently put up a review of Born to Fight, which is a Thai martial arts film, and that did really well. The views are not as high as a lot of my other Hong Kong videos, obviously, because it's a Hong Kong channel, but we got a lot of great comments on that video, and a lot of people in my Facebook group were really excited about that video because they loved that movie and they weren't sure that DVD was out, or like they had heard about the film, but they didn't know where to see it. And so I got a lot of positive feedback on that video, so I thought I would try something else that wasn't Hong Kong that might appeal kind of to the same people. The second reason is that this is a stellar Blu-ray release, and I know that a lot of people who watch this channel are big physical media collectors who are always on the lookout for good editions of films to check out. And so one of the reasons I'm reviewing this is really that this Blu-ray is excellent. And then the third reason I'm reviewing it is that I have watched 4 Park Chan-wook movies this week, and I'm like in a huge Park Chan-wook fanboy mode right now, and I kind of just wanted to do a video about it, and I thought I would try to sneak it in to see if people can get down with it. So this does have the slipcase here, which you can see it pulls out. I'm just going to talk to you about the physical aspects of the release real quick. If you're unfamiliar with what this film is about, I don't want to really spoil it because a lot of the joy of this film is in watching the film and discovering what it's about and how it's structured, because the structure of this film is brilliant. This is reversible cover art, so I'm taking everything out here to show you. And so essentially there's an incident in the JSA, which is the Joint Security Area between North and South Korea. And a woman who is descended from, her father is Korean and she speaks Korean, but she grew up in Switzerland, and Switzerland being a neutral country. She and a Swedish guy, Sweden also being neutral, are tasked with investigating the incident and trying to figure out what happened. And it's very much like a procedural kind of like neo-noir mystery that is really well written and structured. At the same time, it's also a really beautiful movie about friendship and about becoming friends with people and finding things in common and kind of the beauty of connecting with other human beings. And it's also, I think, a tragedy, like a socio-political tragedy, and a film about history and circumstance. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about my impressions of the film at the end. I had never seen this movie. So if you saw my video where I unboxed this, I rented this movie from Netflix before streaming was a thing. I rented it on DVD, and the DVD was so scratchy it wouldn't play. And I returned it, and I just never saw it. So I was really excited to get this edition in the mail because I am a huge Park Chan-wook fan. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what's on here, and I'll talk about the bonus features briefly. I'll give you my impressions. I'll be out of here. So this is a high-definition Blu-ray presentation. It's 1080p. It has lossless Korean DTS HD Master Audio 5.1 and PCM 2.0 stereo soundtracks. It has optional English subtitles, new audio commentary by writer and critic Simon Ward, isolated music and effects track. The music in here is really almost like Baroque and really beautiful and classical. Newly recorded interview with Asian cinema expert Jasper, the Jsa Story and making of the film, 2 archival featurettes on the film's production, about JSA, a series of archival introductions to the film by members of the cast, behind the scenes montage, opening ceremony footage, 2 music videos, theatrical trailer, TV spot, and image gallery. There is a ton of stuff on here. The audio commentary by Simon Ward, who is a film writer and a film critic, is kind of what you'd expect from an audio commentary. Hey guys, it's Will. It's part 2 of the JSA review, which I have right here at the Blu-ray. My phone actually overheated in the inferno of the solarium, so I am outside in the garden now. And so I listed all of the bonus features that were on here. There's also an essay in here, which I can show you very briefly, which is in this booklet. And it's by Kieran Fisher. And the essay kind of contextualizes the film historically, and it also has quotes from Park Chan-wook, which is really cool. so you can kind of learn a little bit about like why he wanted to make this film and what his intent was as a filmmaker and what his fears were. Because at that time there weren't really, according to what I've been kind of learning from this edition of this film, because I'm nowhere near an expert on Korean cinema, there weren't really films that addressed the issue between North and South Korea. And so this was kind of a groundbreaking film in a lot of ways, and it was a huge hit in South Korea at the time. So I'm going to go through kind of the bonus features here and give you my impressions of them, and then I'll talk a little bit about the film. So there's, like I said, there's an audio commentary on here by a writer and critic, Simon Ward, and this is kind of what you would expect from a commentary from a writer and a critic. He kind of goes through this film, compares it to other Park Chan-wook films, analyzes the film a little bit, talks about how it may or may not be similar to his other films and like that kind of stuff. And then you have an interview with Jasper Sharp. So that's 35 minutes long. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later because it's going to kind of be my jumping off point for my kind of thoughts on this film. But the part of that interview that I found to be most fascinating and interesting is that he goes through kind of the history of South Korean films, of that kind of wave of filmmakers and how they started to spread internationally. And so like, you know, the films that started first playing at European festivals and then films that were big hits in Japan, and that those films were different than the ones that were playing at European festivals, and how all these filmmakers kind of developed from that and developed different styles and voices and stuff like that, and where their audiences kind of are, and like which ones were big in Korea versus which ones were big abroad, or both, and stuff like. It's like really, really interesting to hear all that information. Because I don't really know a lot about the history of Korean cinema. I've just watched some of the films and really enjoyed them. Okay, so there's the Jsa Story. This is an archival feature, so it's older. It's 35 minutes long, and it is incredible. It has interviews with Park Chan-wook, interviews with the author who wrote the novel that the movie is based on, interviews with all the actors, the producer. There's like scenes from like Korean news shows that covered the movie when it came out. It gives you like a whole perspective of why the film was made, who made the film, what it was like making the film, and the social impact that the film had when it came out in South Korea. It's really, really incredible feature, and highly recommended. And when I say that this is like an A+ 5-star Blu-ray, these archival features, and the movie looks incredible, it really does. These archival features really like take it over the top and make it like a 5-star release for me. The making of the film, I think, is about 15 minutes long, and that kind of has a lot of similar type of footage to what's in the Jsa Story, but it's different, and so it gives you different perspectives. And then the behind the scenes montage is 14 minutes, and that's really just exactly what it sounds like. It's random clips from behind the scenes of making the film, where you get this fly on the wall perspective of what was going on the set. It's really, really cool because you see them shooting different scenes. Like you see the director talking to actors, you see the director looking through the viewfinder, you see the cinematographer working on stuff, you see all these people on the set working, and you get an idea of what it would have been like to make this film and to be there and to be part of that process. It's really cool. And then the introductions to the film by the cast, that's only about 2 minutes long, so it's the three leads kind of just talking about their impressions of the film and what it's like to be in the film and stuff like that. And then there's 2 music videos on here. So I said I was going to kind of mention the Jasper Sharp interview with regards to a jumping off point for, and I should say that there's almost 2 hours worth of bonus material on here if you don't count the commentary. And then the commentary is the length of the movie, which I think is about 100 minutes, 110 minutes, 109 minutes. So that's whatever, 3.5, 4 hours worth of bonus material on top of the film itself, plus the essay. So this is a region A release. So if you're in the US, guess what? You can get this because Arrow does do US releases. Arrow has also released the Vengeance trilogy, and I think that is out of print, and that kind of bums me out because I really want that now. I have a DVD release of the Vengeance trilogy, but I rewatched it recently, and they're not great DVDs. Like, they're not bad DVDs, but they're not like really high quality DVDs. So now I want that on Blu-ray. So the thing that Jasper Sharp said that I disagree with, which obviously I'm not saying he's wrong, he knows more than I do, but I'm just talking about my perspective on Park Chan-wook and these films, having rewatched a number of his films very close together in a period of a couple days. He says that people debate whether or not Park Chan-wook is an auteur, and I'm not going to get into the auteur theory right now. I've talked about that a lot with Wong Kar-wai, because his films do not have like thematic commonalities. And he does say other than the Vengeance trilogy, but he basically says that the films do not fit together as a piece. in terms of like the way that, you know, Godard's films or Fellini's films all have these commonalities in them. And I would completely disagree with that. And the reason I would disagree with that is that this film is very clearly a tragedy to me. And Mr. Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance is very obviously a tragedy, like in the mold of like Greek tragedy, Shakespearean tragedy. There are sections in Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance that almost remind me of like Hamlet. You know, there's that thing in Hamlet where he sends a letter to her, so, like Ophelia gets misinformation, which is the same thing in Romeo and Juliet. Juliet, I think, right, gets misinformation, and then these tragedies happen because of these quirks of fate and these things that just happen. And I see that a lot in sorry, there's a drone flying over my head. I was like, what is that noise? In Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, and in Lady Vengeance as well. And Old Boy, if you're unfamiliar, Old Boy is basically entirely based on Greek tragedy. So the protagonist in Old Boy, his name is Odesu, and Park Chan-wook has said that he picked that name because it sounds kind of like Oedipus, Oedipus, Odesu, right? So like he really wanted that character to make people think of Greek tragedy. And if you've seen Old Boy, there's a character who went to high school with the Odesu character who looks a lot younger than him, like 15 years younger than him. And the actor actually is significantly younger than the actor who plays Odesu. And the reason for that is that character is supposed to he's supposed to be an immortal in the Greek sense. And Odesu represents a different archetype. And like the film is completely rooted in an attempted modernization in a Korean cultural context of Greek tragedy. And I so those Vengeance movies plus this movie to me are all very clearly tragedies. They also have a really strong sense of fatalism, which is the notion that there is fate at play and that you cannot control the outcome of events and circumstances in your life. And I think that that this is a very fatalistic film, and you see that in the characters and the development of the story and the kind of despair that consumes the characters. And you really see that obviously in the Vengeance films, but I kind of think you see that a little bit in Handmaiden too, but I think that the Handmaiden subverts that in a really clever way. I would also argue that his films they're very dark, they're very violent, and they're very kind of twisted and sexual, but I think that they all come from a place of compassion, looking at a very, very dark world where people are trapped, pitted against one another, and subject to these very destructive, violent forces beyond their control that results in a life of despair. And I think all of those 5 films that I've mentioned, JSA, the Vengeance Trilogy, Handmaiden, all have that. And he's very clearly working from a thematic base or a core of things that he's interested in. I had a conversation. So I'm going to relate this to JSA, and then this is an excellent film. I'm kind of just going off on my theories about Park Chan-wook as a filmmaker and kind of this film and his other films, having just watched a bunch of them. But suffice it to say, excellent film, excellent release. Please go get it. But about 5 or 6 years ago, I worked with a guy who is Korean American, and he was a huge fan of cinema, and our desks were right next to each other, and we would talk a lot about movies. And he was a big fan of Bong Joon-ho, especially, and we would talk a lot about Korean films. And we were talking one day about how a lot of like the best Korean films, or the Korean films that are like most popular in the U.S., or like the really prominent ones that we hear a lot about, are really dark. And he said to me, like, you know, he was kind of talking, I think, a little bit about his parents and relatives of his and stuff like that. So obviously he grew up in the U.S., but he's like, you have to understand this mindset of South Korea being a relatively small country, and there was a war, and North Korea is right there, which is this like dictatorship, and they might have nuclear weapons, and they might fire them at South Korea at any moment. And you know, maybe Japan will attack North Korea, maybe China will get involved, like the US is involved. All these huge superpowers with huge weapons and stuff are all like there, and South Korea is just sitting there. And it was a country that was still very much searching for its identity through art at the time when this film came out. And there's a line, and so that idea of the futility of things and being surrounded by this enormous power and violence that you can't control, and living with this almost like cloud of despair hanging over your head. Obviously, like the average Korean person walking down the street on, you know, a Tuesday afternoon is not thinking about these things. Park Chan-wook is an artist, and artists think about these things and they engage with these things, right? So there's a line in JSA where 2 soldiers are talking, and what they're talking about is essentially the responsibility they have as soldiers to try to avoid a war between the two Koreas and to try not to, just randomly shoot at people, whatever, right? Like along this kind of demilitarized zone where they're really just kind of facing each other along the border, right? And one of them says, if the two Koreas get into a war, the U.S. could nuke the entire peninsula off the face of the earth before we fired the first shot. And that philosophy, to me, I see all across all of Park Chan-wook's films. And I haven't seen his first two films, which are mentioned in the bonus material here as not really being in any way similar to this and kind of just being experiments of him trying to figure out how to be a filmmaker. But I think that these films where he really takes a strong voice and an authorship of the film, again, I'm not going to get into the auteur theory. It's just an easy word for convenience that I'm using. They really do have a really strong, profound voice. They're very dark, very violent, very disturbing movies. Like an Old Boy, or not Old Boy, excuse me, Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance. A tiny spoiler here. There's like a scene where you see like someone's body. It's like the loved one of a main character is going into an incinerator in a coffin, and then they actually show a shot inside of their hand, like catching on fire in the incinerator, and it's really disturbing and depressing, but also I think it comes from a place of compassion, because you wouldn't have any emotional relationship to a shot like that if it were like a horror film. But it's not. It's a tragedy. And so you emotionally relate to it. That's what makes it disturbing. But because of that, I think it comes from a place of compassion and a place where, order has broken down and things are just depressing and dark and bleak, and people don't have control over their circumstances, and that leads to violence and despair and tragedy. And I think you see that across all these films. So my name is Will. This is really a 5-star release of JSA from Arrow Video. I really encourage you to go and check this out. I'm sorry I've talked so long about a film that is not a Hong Kong film, but I just love this release, and I've been watching all of Park Chan-wook's movies recently. I really just wanted a place to talk about it, so I thought this would be the place. It's Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. I thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.